Okay, so so I'm part of the Party 2 Pacific Agribusiness Research and Development Initiative Group, which is a project that's funded by ACR, and a lot of the work that we do, has to do with strengthening the value chain for a number of agribusinesses, and one of the projects that I've been involved in is honey. So in 2019, we carried out 2019 April to June 2020. We carried out a survey, and this was a consumer and retail survey pertaining to our local honey. So we wanted to know a number of things. So what do we know about our local consumers of honey, their perceptions, motivations, and habits? How about the retailers, and how does this information help beekeepers, particularly in their marketing and branding? So one of the things that I'm going to be touching on is labeling, particularly labeling. So this is what my presentation will be about today. There are a number of areas that were touched in the consumer and retail survey, but one of the areas the main area I'm going to touch on is labeling. So the survey was conducted across Fiji from the northern, western, eastern, and central division. There was about 174 surveys, 154 online, and this was when the first wave of COVID hit. So we started off with face-to-face surveys, and then we ended up with doing 154 online surveys, which was done through Google Forms. So a large number of the respondents were from the central division, as you can see there, 63%, followed by a lot of other respondents from the western division, so about 23%, followed by the northern and eastern. So just a bit of demographics about who took this survey. Most of the respondents were within the age group of 30 to 49, so 67% of them were between 30 to 49, most of them females, so 69.5% of them. Minority groups, 48.8% for Itoke levels. Most of the respondents fell between 6th making annually and 5th annually. So it was good to see a range of consumers with a range of incomes that they use. And 64% of the respondents have children in the home. So this is just a bit about who took the survey. Was when we did the survey, part of it included a number of statements, and we asked the respondents to tell us, do you agree, do you not agree, are you not sure of this statement? So one of the statements, so I'm just going to be highlighting the data that is pertaining to labeling. So the first question around labeling was, we asked the consumers, do you find labeling to be very helpful? So as you can see on the graph, my presentation will be very data related. So I hope I don't bore you with all these graphs, but this is on the ground data. So over 60%, close to 70% of the consumers found labeling to be very helpful. So what we can imply from this is labeling is important to also influence the decision for consumers to buy honey. But what exactly do we want to include in our labels to help consumers make that decision to buy your honey? So I'm sure there are already some labeling laws that many of you may already be aware of. And I think Theo may touch on this. I'm sure FBA also makes this quite clear. There are labeling laws, things that you must include, but there are some things that you can include in your label that have a very strong marketing influence and can help to make your product stand out from others. So we know that consumers do find labeling very useful. So what's one of the things that you can include in your label? Consumers, close to 50% of consumers said that, yes, I agree that I buy honey because of the story behind it. So a story is very important. And when I mean a story, not a whole chapter attached to your label, but what is it that you can tell your customer about yourself, about your product, about your history? And a story about your product helps to connect with your consumer or your buyer. You're not going to be there to do direct marketing. So there's going to be a couple of things that you need to include in your labeling to help you connect with your buyer. And I think a lot of times we've seen examples of this, where we tend to, where some products can be personalized. So a good story is around yourself, the producer, your history, and even just about your own product, just your journey. So that's something that's interesting and that connects consumers to your product. We've also found that consumers like to know where honey is produced. So close to 80% of consumers agreed that they would like to know where honey is produced. So the location also of honey creates some sort of association in their mind for consumers. So for example, Singapore is well known for being the salad bowl of Fiji. Fiji water uses this really well. They present Fiji as a location of pristine waters, of great drinking water, which is safe and clean. So an association too with the origin and your product is very important. So labels can include, and probably should include for the sake of your marketing, the origin of honey. There are some places, I like wine, so there are some places that, for example, in Australia, when customers pick out a wine, they might pick it out because of the particular location of the vineyard. So there's also reputation behind origin. So labels, including the origin, are also important. In terms of where honey is mostly located, okay, so we found that most of the consumers frequently buy honey from supermarkets. Okay, the reason I'm bringing this to our attention this evening is because when you walk into a supermarket, there are many labels and many signs of everything. So I guess it's also important to think of a label that will stand out on a shelf or in a particular aisle. And it probably pays for you to go and even visit your own supermarket just to see how a certain label, what are the labels that stand out for you. So in saying this, most of the, it would be good for you to find out yourself about labels that stand out for yourself. So if we know that most of our beekeepers are aiming to have honey in supermarkets, then the X factor of standing out is important. So this can be through your labeling. This can also be through your packaging. And later on, I'll also mention what the retailers are suggesting for beekeepers. So having a label that stands out in a shelf is important. We found that close to 60% of consumers would they agree that honey should come in tamper-proof containers. But what does this mean for labels? It indicates to us that our consumers are aware of food safety. They're aware of the need for a quality product that hasn't been tampered with. But when it comes to labels around safety on your own product, this will probably have to go back to your own labeling laws that pertain to local honey. So it's just important to have in our minds that the consumers here in our local consumers do also think about the safety the food safety and the food handling issues or safety, consumer safety issues around the product. So they're quite, and particularly with COVID, this is probably something that's been raised now, safety and the handling of products, particularly raw products. One of the questions we also asked consumers was, we can see there that about 50% of our respondents don't agree that they need to have honey that's easier to use. This indicates also to us that our local consumers are quite accustomed to the use of honey. The convenience of using it isn't something that has that's front and center that we saw in our survey. So local consumers are not very influenced with the ease or difficulty of using honey. So this may indicate that labels, however, may be directed towards storage, proper storage of honey. So I'm not sure whether this is something that you must include on your labels as part of the labeling laws, but I know Theo may also touch a bit on labels around storage. Okay, so one of the questions we also asked them was, do you buy honey online? And 77.6% of them said no. However, when we asked them about the reasons for not purchasing honey online, most of this was around the fact that they didn't know it was possible. So about 65.5% of consumers didn't know that it was possible to buy honey online. So we can safely say that had they known that it would be available online, they probably would go ahead and order and purchase online. And with the way that COVID has hit us also, this sudden boom in businesses to exist virtually, businesses to use social media and to use internet and digital spaces, digital wallets, digital forms of payment, I think this is something that we all need to be a bit more considerate about. But how do we go about labeling for social media purposes, for marketing on social media? Well, this is probably something that you yourselves as producers or traders need to look into. What does an attractive label look like on social media? So this may be something that's important to consider. A label that's attractive for the reasons of social media. We asked the consumers also, what volume of honey do you buy, and what that you usually buy, the volume of honey that you usually buy, and what volume of honey do you prefer to buy? So the customers mentioned that they usually buy 750 gram bottles of honey, but they prefer the 500 gram bottles. So this is something that I guess is important to consider in terms of the sizes of packages and labels and the amount of space that you have for a 500 gram bottle, amount of space that you can use up for your labeling. So this was this result that we saw for consumers also agreed with what we were seeing with the retailers. So retailers were saying that so when we did our survey for retailers, we covered about 7 retailers, all supermarkets, all in the central division, and we asked them a number of questions. So some of the questions that we asked them, what are the current sizes that you're selling and the volume that's being sold, and also which of the volumes of honey sells the fastest. So they tend to buy a lot of 1 kilo bottles, but the sizes that sell fast are the 500 gram bottles. So it's good to see that that agrees with the consumer survey. So again, what does that mean for labeling and packaging and spaces for labels if you're going to have if you're going to aim to have a lot more 500-gram bottles. We also asked retailers about marketing in store. So we asked, are there any current are there currently any display stands or any forms of marketing in-house for these honey brands? 100% of them, all the 7 supermarkets said no. We only provide shelf space for honey. We do not do the direct marketing of honey. However, they did say if producers want to see a larger movement of their honey from the shelves, it's probably best that they focus on their own marketing. So do your own marketing for your own product. A couple of the retailers did say one of the great ways to do this is to have a display stand. So I've just got a picture on the slide there. That's just an example. But being a bit more proactive from the producer side or the supplier side in-house marketing at the shops or at the supermarket can play a very important role in moving your product from off the shelf and into consumer homes. So when we asked the retailers, would you consider having, do you go ahead and have that stand available? They said no. 71.4% of them said no, meaning they would prefer that the producers are the ones that bring in these display stands, that go to that effort of having this effort of marketing. They would prefer that more marketing from the producer or supplier end. So this is my last slide, and we asked retailers, what do you think are some things that that beekeepers can do or producers can do to improve the movement or to improve the selling of their honey, or the movement of honey off the shelves? So it's very clear to them, and this is something that we also saw in our consumer survey. The consumers are very aware of the nutritional and the medicinal properties of honey, yet the current messaging and promotions that are done by by producers, there isn't enough messaging around this property of honey, around the fact that it's healthy, and around the fact that it's also has medicinal properties. So they suggested more promotions or messaging on its use and nutritional value of honey. They also suggested attractive packaging and labeling, potentially the use of glass. That's something that really producers will have to make a choice on. Boosting marketing from the producer or supplier end. So having ownership over the marketing of your product in a retail outlet. Honey display stands, as I had previously outlined, are good, but supermarkets only provide space. But having your product in a supermarket doesn't guarantee that it's going to move quickly. That's something that producers need to take ownership of. There was one supermarket that said, we have been working with this producer / supplier for over 10 years, and they are very close to the shelf. So they know how much stock there is at a particular time, and they know what they need to do to move stock. So having that close relationship also with the retailers, to the point of what they know what is on the floor and how much they need to move, is also important. So this is something that's not easy, because it also requires relationship building between the retailer and yourself. So there's 2 relationships that we're trying to build: the relationship between the producer or the beekeeper and the consumer, and also when it comes to retail outlets, the producer and the retailer. So those are 2 different types of relationships, and also 2 different types of approaches to strengthen that relationship. They also mentioned to consider a bottling or packaging facility. I think this was something that they said maybe FDA would be able to consider down the track. And one of the things that they mentioned was that there seems to be a lot of honey that moves around national events and public holidays, religious holidays, and they seem to see more of the honey moving from shelves. So it also pays for producers to know when are the hot seasons for moving honey, and how can you market around that time.
So it's a pleasure to be here to talk to you about some perspectives about honey labelling, and I'm really going to focus this session on giving you some insights from labelling examples in New Zealand and Australia. But I'm going to relate everything back to Fiji law, essentially because most companies and everybody listening tonight will be more interested in basically what's happening in Fiji, essentially. So a bit of background on me. Let me try and get this better sharing. So look, I've worked in the food industry for some of you people haven't met me before. I've been working in the food industry and been coming and going into Fiji for the last sort of 10 years. I studied food science and business management and marketing. And in the last 20 or 30 years, I've worked operating factories and running businesses essentially, and working in the sales and marketing and export market development. I used to be an export manager many years ago, and have done a lot of work essentially researching products and markets and various aquaculture, marine and food value chains. So that's basically me when I was a young lad, essentially back in '65. You can work out how old I am now. And really, I'm here today representing the Pacific Agribusiness Research and Development Initiative, which is part of the University of Sunshine Coast, essentially. So I've got many roles, but this is one of the good roles, working in Fiji, one of my favourite places to go and visit and work with. Today's purpose essentially is to help you get some insights on to build your customer base potentially. And as Salote has gone through this, a lot of this has occurred back in 21, where there was a symposium AGM, and a lot of information was sort of translated to everybody back then. And of course, Salote has just run through a summary of basically the origins of the consumer research that we had conducted. So we've seen a recent decline in tourism trade and hospitality, and that suggests to me that whilst it's difficult to focus developing industry into export markets, there certainly needs to be a much bigger focus on the domestic market development. There are many beekeepers, obviously, and I get a feel, having worked in organised retail since the 80s in Asia and in Australia, of course, that it's important to look at the consumption levels of your product and just see how you can expand that. And the interesting thing about the statistics we've seen is that per capita consumption in Fiji is relatively low. It's obviously been impacted a lot by COVID. But I think this window of opportunity exists today to enable people to start thinking broadly about improving their product presentation and moving essentially from where they might currently be today and try to improve the whole range, presentation and branding. And you may recall I did the whole branding exercise to try to get people to focus very much on how might they brand in particular organised markets. And in organised markets, I'm talking about sort of the supermarkets, I'm talking about the hotel, restaurant, catering space where people consume honey off location, and obviously there's obviously online opportunities as well as export opportunities, hopefully sometime in the future. So understanding the potential of the supermarket channel is really critical. And I think it's important that you do look at your presentation and try to improve that as you progress your business development. So my sort of message today is that I think we need to focus very much on prioritizing retail growth. And there's some really good examples of that already being done already in Fiji. And retailers, by their very nature, want suppliers who provide a return on floor space. And I know I covered that in the last seminar, but we need to think about how retailers operate and what's in it for a retailing operation. But the message today was really to step up your retailing efforts and work with retailers who provide the shelf space. But it's really up to you as a supplier to position, promote, and sell your product. And, you know, shoppers, when they do go shopping in a normal environment, have lots of choices. And honey competes not only against other honeys, but also other products. And we know supermarkets may have up to, you know, not only up to thousands, but up to maybe up to 25 and 30,000. And in some places in Asia, particularly in the large hypermarkets, you've got something like 50,000 different consumer products in a supermarket environment. So when you're in the supermarket environment and the consumer is pushing a trolley and walking around very quickly to do their weekly shopping, they've got lots of choices to make. And how you present your product and how many facings you might have, and your reputation and things like your pricing and the way you promote your product in that supermarket channel has a fair bit of bearing. So I feel there's a great time now for many of you to consider how you're going to kickstart your current business. And I do appreciate how difficult it is at the moment in Fiji. I just want to encourage you that we are here essentially to help you try to move this emerging industry beyond where it is today. Because Cooper and Salote and John and Nilesh and the FBA team all believe that we need to improve our communication, our education of how do we improve our business models, and also educating our consumers and filling gaps and questions that consumers might have when they see products on shelves, whether it might be in a, in a local market, in a village fair, or roadside, etc. So I've provided some of those images there because I want to see over time that the industry can progress. And consumers, as we know, demand clear and accurate information, and the more information you provide, the more questions they ask. And there's a limitation to what you can put on your label and your packaging, right? And we also know that governments around the world, and particularly in Fiji and in Australia and New Zealand, have very strong laws regarding what we can say, how we promote, what we can pack on our packs, on our products, essentially. So honey regulations are quite simple to follow if you've got a good copy of the regulations. And we can provide a copy. I mean, John Caldera could provide one. He's got a good copy. He provided me the set. And if we go to particularly section 13 of the Food Safety Regulations, which was gazetted back in 2009, it outlines the legal obligations for labelling of food products. So increasingly, we're going to see pressure, particularly post the pandemic, as the world continues to change and improve, that more effort is going to be put on by government in terms of what's on a label and what's on a package, and the legalities and the ethics around how producers are promoting their products to consumers and protecting the interests of consumers and the food safety for consumers to make sure everything we provide is risk-free. So the Act, which was gazetted back in 2003, covers all pre-packaged food products, which are processed, packed, distributed, imported, and labelled. So there's a copy of the front section of that. And like I said, we can email you a copy of that. And if you've got specific questions that you can't understand, because there's quite a number of pages in we can try to help you navigate your way through that. So improving your labeling is important. Presentation helps market and promote your product. That's Saloti made those very strong points. So consider your reputational risk and the peers in your industry, because labels are a really key feature. Along with packaging, they provide important messages about your product, about you, and what you are trying to promote. Very important that you understand that labeling gives you a great opportunity through that presentation to differentiate what you offer from your competitors, whether they are competitors in Fiji or potentially when Fiji eventually allows imported products to come in from overseas. Hopefully, the window that you have over the next few years allows you to develop your local industry. And I think that's why the Fijian government has stopped importing generally of other consumer products, honey consumer products, so that you get a fresh opportunity to develop your sector. However, you must not give false, deceptive, or inaccurate information to consumers. And that is enshrined in law. And I'm sure the policing of that isn't that strong at the moment in Fiji, but I think over time that will improve. I've seen that change a lot in Australia, and it becomes a real challenge as a producer, how you keep up to all the current regulations and changes in labelling. So packaging selection, when I look at how am I going to package my product, is really critical, because the label shape and size are critical components, because they need to work in harmony with the packaging selections that you've made. And so you need initially to review your packaging and make sure the current packaging that you have available in Fiji, which I know is quite limited, whether it's plastic or it's glass or it's tubs or whatever it might be, is quite limited. And your ability to source large numbers of cheap packaging is quite difficult. And I understand those challenges in Pacific Island communities when you've got small industries and you don't have much volume and competition with suppliers providing lower cost packaging. So I do understand how challenging that is in Fiji, right? But you need to look at the dimensions of your product, your label, and where it's going to be placed on the bottle. And how big does a label need to be? It really depends on, you know, the amount of information you want to put on the product. And if you do follow the food regulations, you know, you're going to find out that a postage stamp isn't going to work. And you're going to essentially need to really explore this whole labeling challenge. And if you look at the type of label, is it going to be plastic or paper? And I'm probably going to show you some pictures later on about what's happening in Australia and in New Zealand about what producers are currently doing and how challenging that question becomes. So you need to review your packaging and decide how you're going to change your label. Is your packaging suitable? And you may have to consider, you know, when you look at all the regulations, I'm going to go through some of those as we're going through in the presentation, about, you know, considering where you're going to place those labels and how many labels do you really need, because each label you place is going to have a cost. So I'm just going to pick an example here of Capilano. They've got this fantastic squeeze, category leading 375ml product, and they have a sort of design that specifically so it wraps around the side. So you've got on one side, you've got the nutritional information with a 15-gram serving size, and the ingredients on the right-hand side. And then on the left-hand side, when you look at it, they've got the sort of product details with the barcode, which is required in Australia. And then on the subsequent side, they've got the back label, right? Which you know, essentially says there's basically 3 labels. And if you look closely at the first label, they've also got a tamper-evident shrink leaf, which you tear off. And that's their sort of solution. And really their batch information is really sitting, I don't know whether you can see my pointer there, but the packed on dates and the production time is being scanned on by an inkjet printer. So you can imagine this bottling operation probably runs at 50, 60, bottles per minute, and it's highly automated. And I don't expect that is something that you would consider yet in Fiji. So label features essentially are really critical here, because what other people are also doing is seeing recent innovations are basically using the necks of the tops of jars essentially to put an additional label for more information, right? This particular company, Bloomberg, which operates not far from here, has an extended label which runs through to the lid. So they use that blue tear off as their tamper evidence, which is an innovative way. But to apply that label, you need a very sophisticated type of printer, label applicator. And they would consider themselves in the premium. It's a heritage brand that goes back to 1839. And they do a lot of different products apart from honey in the condiment range, and do jams and so forth. So they can scale up and have this much more sophisticated premium look. This particular company, Beechworth, is using a clear label essentially, right? And also a very messy looking shrink sleeve around the top, right? And this particular product also contains honeycomb, and that's an innovative feature. So they are selling sort of components of honey in the solid honeycomb in their 350 gram jar, right? And if you look at another part of their range, they also have a glass jar which has, a recipe for a salad dressing on the back, and you can use a quarter of the jar to put honey and then vinegar, etc., and olive oil, etc., to fill it up and shake it and make a very simple salad dressing, which is a feature to attract consumers, so they can actually use that jar for measuring, a half a cup, a quarter of a cup in the kitchen. So finding a logical balance between the content, the appearance, and the cost of the features is really a challenge. So label selection. What will it cost to design, produce, and of course the time to label each bottle and jar needs to be uppermost in your mind. How will you be receiving your labels from your supplier? And I'm assuming, of course, you're going to think about who can supply these labels. How many suppliers are able to exist in Fiji? What do labels cost? How am I going to get them printed? How am I use those? Am I going to get them flat printed on sheets or on rolls? How will I adhere that label consistently? Because the label needs to be on the jar every perfect time, right? We cannot have labels in different locations. They need to be consistently centralized and need to be proportionally applied. So do I peel and stick by hand, or do I use a labeling machine? And most of you won't be able to afford a labeling machine, but with the advent of online purchasing, there are thousands of smaller semi-automated electrical labeling machines that you can use, right? How will you apply batch or lot details, production dates, and best before dates? And by that I mean this particular company in New Zealand is applying it with an inkjet coder, so that you can see the batch, the best before date. So on their bottling and labeling line, they've got this automated unit which actually applies. And I imagine that EG2 is probably a timing of the day, essentially, and they're able to track each particular jar. So using use by tickets, stickers or tickets on products that can be peeled off are no longer permitted on labels. So that's something to think about in the future. Now, labels and shipping is also important in your label selection to consider if you are intending packaging into an outer carton, consider how the label will be impacted on by movement during shipping and transporting. We want to avoid moisture and damage to the label during distribution and storage and presentation on the shelf. And we also want to make sure that our labels are protected from scuffing and potentially have some sort of seal applied after printing to ensure they are generally waterproof. So your labeling designer and printer can talk to you about the types of adhesives that could be used, the types of labeling material that may be available to you, because they all come at a particular cost. And an outer can be designed to assist loading the honey on a supermarket shelf. So this is also an additional trend in Australia, where we're starting to see when people are loading on the stock in the supermarket, the tray or the carton has got a tear off, and it's easier to lay 12 by 2 or 6 by 2 or 12 or 24 by 4 onto the supermarket shelf. And that has become a new trend. So you get these improvements, which are really interesting to retailers because they save time loading shelves. And that's really a thing to consider. And there's a cost and benefit trade-off in all these features, right? Now, I'm going to run through now some really critical label components that I think are very important for you to consider as you start to look at this complex process of how do I design and label my product. So what do I need? So I've got critical label components 1 to 4. And the first one, of course, is pretty simple because we discussed it the other day. We're talking about brand. That's essential. Second one, of course, is product name, honey, right? Don't assume that people know what your product is purporting to be. The second one, of course, is your logo and your image, right? Your logo is your image. So if you do have a logo, please try to integrate that in the design of that label. And you can see this company from New Zealand has a very strong position in terms of the way it's used color and graphics here to really sell the Arataki brand in this new sort of cardboard pack that they are promoting, which is 100% recyclable. The other item, the fourth component of that is net weight. And I'm going to run through these 12 critical parts for you. And if you have any questions on these, we can cover these in the end. Components 5 to 7 are really the next component. And we're talking here about the ingredient list. And normally, because honey is quite simple, you only got to basically, essentially say, look, I've got pure Fijian honey or 100% honey or honey. And it's implied because you don't have any other ingredients. If you're doing a jam product, it would have, the fruit, the sugar, and maybe you might put something else in that, in that product. And if you've got a very highly processed product, you might have up to, 10, 15 different types of ingredients in that. And you would list those in order. So the regulations that I talked about earlier give you some guidelines in terms of that. I'm not going to cover that all in detail today because it's a quite complex area. But in your industry, essentially, just mentioning the word honey, because that's the only ingredient essentially allowed by law that should be present in a product. So the next thing is storage condition, and it's it's great to even reinforce people that storing it room temperature is something that you need to do. Once you open it, you don't have to put it in the refrigerator, etc., etc. So you can decide what sort of information you want to tell your customer. Here they're talking about natural honey crystallizing and what to do about that, right? And And of course, the seventh point on my critical component list is a nutritional panel, because even though in Fiji it's not a critical requirement at the moment, consumers are starting to demand, you know, what is actually in my product. And there are rules around what nutritional information you must include. And essentially, you can look at a lot of the imported products or produced products around the world, and they've got very similar nutritional panel information. I know many of you are using the US one, which is quite similar, but you know, I think you can make a choice in Fiji at the moment about how you you put on a nutritional panel and whether you should put on a nutritional panel. I think it's really a choice at the moment. I'm not sure government is actually forcing you essentially to cover that off. So I'm going to share another one here with you on nutritional panel, because here you've got a much more sophisticated approach by this particular company, because what essentially they've done here, they've got the servings per pack, right? So they've got 26 servings in the package. They then relate the serving size, which is 15 grams, which is quite smart. It's 2 teaspoons, right? And 2 teaspoons is much more acceptable for those who are consuming, you know, sugar and are concerned about sugar. So they've got a column there for the percentage of daily intake, right, which is based on a diet of 8,700 kilojoule. So, you know, 2 teaspoons of sugar is only 14% of your sugar intake. So that's pretty smart for those people concerned about the amount of sugar they're consuming, especially if they're diabetics. They've got the quantity per serving, right, of energy, protein, fat, and the carbohydrates and sodium. So this is really good nutritional information. And I think in most cases, if you do provide good information to consumers, it gives good positive messages to the consumer that you care about their health. And here, of course, you've got the translation of that. Rather than being per serving size, you've got it per 100 grams. So people can make the translation on a, you know, per 100 gram basis. You know, how many calories, if I had 100 grams, would I be consuming, right? Both in metric and in imperial. So you've got those ratings of 51 calories per, you know, per 2 teaspoons, or 25.5 calories per spoon, you know, and the kilojoule rating, essentially, especially those people that are concerned about, you know, their calorie intake or their kilojoule intake per day. So you're starting to see that trend creeping into the nutritional panel, because consumers are demanding more information. The next, you know, 5 components are also really important. And I've got an example here of a company in New Zealand, essentially Airborne, which is really, you know, got traceability foremost. And I'm sure with their QR code system here, they are, you know, working down the blockchain type of thinking. And they will be able to trace virtually every particular product they produce back to each farm. And they allow you to do that, right, by providing essentially the lot or batch number, right? And they've got this QR code essentially and the best before date on there. So they've decided, for example, for a product, I think they probably put 4 to 5 years best before on their product, right? They've got things like the country of origin, they've got the barcode, they've got their address, and they've also got, you know, something about HACCP certification program, RMP Airborne 4. So they basically talk about their guarantee of food safety. So essentially, we've got 12 critical components that are, I think, are really important. And you can see their nutritional information approach. They work on 20 grams nutritional information, and they've been very sparse on the amount of information they are giving you compared to the previous example, right? Even though it's the same company, they've got a different approach on this particular pack than another. So Companies with different products will vary what they put on their labels, essentially. But what they are trying to do here is try to link through the QR code you back to the airborne website in New Zealand, so you can follow the journey as a consumer from the hive to your home, so that they can send you a lot of emotional information and a lot of factual information about the product. So some of the other features I thought I would share with you is this emerging area of organic. It's not significant in the Australian or New Zealand honey category, but this particular product is a house brand, and I included it because it's a brand that's controlled by Woolworths, and it's packed by an approved supplier in Australia, and it's actually certified. So Woolworths would not accept a non-certified honey, so they require that particular supplier and the product to be certified by a third party, right? And it has a certification number, and it's labeled as certified organic, and it gives the guarantee that the product is actually organic and it meets all those certified organic requirements. Because in Australia, you can still call something organic without it being certified. So there's a bit of a loose area at the moment. I think the authorities, the Australian Food New Zealand health labelling people are sort of looking at those areas as time goes by. And the other thing they've also done here is put a health star rating, which is an option. So they've chosen to give, you know, honey a 1-star health rating, obviously because of the high levels of sugar. So it's a strange move by Woolworths to actually put that on there, in my view, when we should be selling honey medicinally. So, oops, let me go back. So this particular slide is really, let me go back, sorry. I got out of control there with my clicking. So here we've got a couple of examples of companies telling their particular story. So using their label essentially. The one in the middle, of course, is talking about droughts and bushfires and having a damaged environment, and you need to support farmers and growers and in difficult times. This particular company on the left-hand side from, Egmont Honey is selling its provenance. It's selling, its background, its heritage, a region that's held sacred by the traditional Maori. That's our home, and, our place is to be trusted, and it's a great place to come and visit, and we have this fantastic honey product. So it's appealing to your emotions, and it's trying to make a connection with you, essentially, by using the large labeling face that they've got on this particular pack to sell, a story. And we know that selling a story is really important, because we want to build all these intangible messages about our brand to consumers. And we want to get their custom, and we want to keep them as our customers. So this particular company also uses some innovative tear-off tops, which is tamper evident. This particular company has got a little flip top on here, and this next one here, particularly Bee Honey, they promote, every sale. Oops, they promote. They provide 1% back to the planet, and they've got they return money back into the planet, protecting bees, and then reinvest some of the benefits. And you can go onto those websites and have a look at what they are doing in terms of promoting their particular products. Also on the bottom of that label, you can see also there's the arl.org.au, which is used in Australia and New Zealand to promote the recyclability of the jar, the lid, and the seal, so that sustainability has become an important issue for consumers, and these producers are using labels to sell the benefits of their packaging in recycling. You can see this particular product also has it here as well. We're not sure this one is clear or not as well, but you can see that these issues of sustainability are coming through on the labeling, and producers are using those to get messages across to consumers. So one thing that we know happens, of course, is copycat labeling. And it's easy sometimes to copy someone else. I've got a couple of examples here. Fortunately, it's not done a lot in this country or in New Zealand because there are very tough rules on copycat labeling. So it's best to avoid looking at that sort of stuff and try to focus very much on your own individual, creativity and your ability, right, to be different. And whilst some of this is done around the world, I thought I'd just mention it today because I'd like to see people, as they try and improve, that they try to be as innovative as particularly as possible as they can be. So taking the next step is basically breaking through the clutter, right, that exists at the moment, and really being clear about where you want to take your product and grab your customers' attention. And I think what's important here with the labeling is that you need to integrate that with the whole package. And I recently did a scan in Europe about what European consumers are judging when it comes to the total packaging of products. And we can see that some simple things, they rate colour and the way it's presented on the product as 30% important. The graphics are around 12%. The structural design of your whole product presentation is around 10, 11%. Your logo around 10%, your layout, your picture. Your label size is very small, right? So I think we need to think, when we look holistically, about how do we pull the whole package and presentation together and what's really going to make us stand out on the shelf. And if you have questions about that sort of stuff, and whether this research, of course, is relevant, I'm happy to sort of take some conversations offline with you if you need to. Talk to me about those things, or to Salote, or to, Nilesh or John. So the conclusion is, creating a market identity via good labeling requires investment and application of the law and good practices. So today I hope to sort of give you some, I've given you some insights, and I hope they've been beneficial.